Welcome back to the Federally Black Collective weekly live stream show, Thursday Thoughts. Information is power, and we, the Federally Black Collective, consider ourselves a powerful vehicle of providing factual and relevant information to the public. We keep you up to date with education, youth, city policy, and politics, as well as current and relevant events that happen daily. We are made up of Lynn, myself, political strategist extraordinaire, Lamont Styles, community advocate and owner of Lifestyles Barber Academy, James, the silent assassin, and of course, Drew, our favorite producer, is holding it down at home because due to COVID, we no longer shoot in person. So thank you guys all for giving me some grace as I navigate this technology that is not my strong suit. But we are sponsored by Rugged Genius, EvaCook.com, Pretty Garden Entertainment, Positive Vibes, located in the Commons Mall, and also online at PositiveVibes1111.com. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, guys. Tonight we have some special guests here. I will let them introduce themselves a little bit as we get comfy, but we have a few elected officials and community leaders that want to have a conversation. So I will start. How about you introduce yourself, Senator Peterson?
Thank you very much. My name is Jamie Peterson. I represent the 43rd Legislative District, which is the middle of Seattle. I've been in the legislature for about 14 years, I guess at this point, 7 in the House, 7 in the Senate, and I chair the Senate Law and Justice Committee, which I think is the main reason that I'm here tonight. I guess a few words about me, if it's not going on too long. I grew up in Edgewood, just south of Federal Way, and actually my mom worked for Federal Way Public Schools for many years, was at Sunnycrest and Mark Twain as well. So, and I started my school at Spring Valley Elementary right on Highway 99. So a fair amount of time in Federal Way when I was growing up. And I guess I'm old enough to remember when the SeaTac Mall was built before it became called the Commons. So anyway, happy to be here with you all. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation and to learning about priorities for your community in terms of reform of the way that we do policing in our state.
Thank you. How about Mayor Woodard?
Sure. I'm Victoria Roberts. I am the proud mayor, no offense to Federal Way, of the greatest city in the universe, Tacoma, Washington. I've been mayor for 2.5 years. Am from Tacoma, been here since I was 3 years old. Before being mayor, I served 7 years on the city council. And before that, I spent 5 years as a parks commissioner. So I have been committed to my community and this work. I've served as president and CEO of the Urban League here in Tacoma. So I've spent a lot of time in my community working on behalf of everyone who lives here, but especially African Americans, and am excited to be a part of this conversation this evening. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. All right, how about your next counterpart, Deputy Mayor Blocker?
Thank you. So I'm Keith Blocker, Deputy Mayor of the City of Tacoma. I've been serving in the role as Deputy Mayor just almost 6 months or so right now. Most recently reelected to my council position in 2019 for a second term as representative of District 3, which is the Hilltop, Central Tacoma, and parts of South Tacoma. Originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, moved here in 2006. My professional career started around youth development in the nonprofit sector, where I had the privilege to work for Mayor Woodard when she was a council member of the city of Tacoma. So youth advocacy and youth development is a passion of mine, and I was able to use that energy and use the recognition of being a youth advocate to take that to city government, to represent the community and focus on homelessness, issues around public safety, and do what I can do to close the wealth gap and create more access for Black people and low-income people in the city of Tacoma. So It's an honor to be in this position as a council member and now deputy mayor. And I look forward to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for that. Let me see. How about you, Mr. Thomas?
Good evening. My name is Fred Thomas. I'm with Next Steps Washington, and we are working for police accountability. We are also keeping an eye on which of the investigations that are going on right now, whether they're following I-940 or not. And just yesterday, we were asked by the Valley IIT team if we could help provide them with community representatives for their different cities. So we're just on the forefront trying to not only get things moving forward, but keep things straight. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Rye.
Hello, everyone. Eddie Rye. Do I have an echo? Is that me or what? But anyway, I made a statement at the beginning, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Just to give you a little bit of background, in 2016, we were able to take Jefferson Davis's name off of Highway 99. In 1939, the state legislators and the Daughters of Confederacy conspired to name Highway 99 from the Canadian border to the Oregon border, Jefferson Davis. And in 2016, the name was removed and it was supposed to have been replaced with a Black Civil War veteran buried in Snohomish County by the name of William P. Stewart. I have not seen these Stewart signs yet, but what happened is that a state representative by the name of Hans Dunshee out of Snohomish County led the effort, and he was appointed to the Snohomish County Council. And because all this surfaced about this successful removal of the Confederate president's name, he lost re-election. So I'm also working on some other economic justice issues, and the coronavirus definitely has slowed down, but I have some recommendations for economic justice. Also, we're talking now about the disparities that the Black community has been facing for centuries. And I've been meeting with and talking to some members of the Congressional Black Caucus about having an official designation for African descendants of the United States enslaved in every federal agency. And then we can talk about reparations after we do that. So that's just a couple of things that I'm working on right now. Also host a radio program, Urban Forum Northwest. Mayor Wooders was on, I think, last month. Vice Mayor Blocker, I got to get him because it's been about a few months since he's been on. So anyway, that's me in a snapshot right there. Did we lose her?
Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, actually, Mr. Rye, you brought up some good points. So you brought up 3 specific things. Is there one area you'd like to start the conversation first with the group?
Yeah, I think that having the coronavirus really has illuminated the disparities we have in the Black community. And one of the things that I follow is where the money is going. And it's unfortunate in Martin Luther King Jr. County, no public agency, including the school districts, is doing more than 0.5% by companies owned by African descendants, not 0.5%. Which leads up to the other disparities that we have. And that's what led to the gentrification, which I call economic apartheid. So as the Black Lives Matter movement has illuminated our disparities. And the other thing this time around is that we're talking about Black folks, because a lot of times the federal government, for example, allow white women to be minorities, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. So in Washington State, for years, 4 white women were getting about 75 or 80% of the total DBE goals. They had 100 trucks and 99 of the drivers were white men, $45 an hour plus union bennies. So there are a lot of things, and some of the agencies acted as though they were intimidated by these folks. And then if you have people enforcing the law who have the mentality of some of these cops we see in abusing Black folks, then we can see why nothing is happening. And too often, when these programs and our inclusion is mandated, they leave it up to a private business owner to select a subcontractor. And I've been proposing for years that if you know most of the Black companies are at a certain level, then why don't you just break the contract off and to give it awarded to let them compete for it? There's a state law that was passed it must have been 10 or 12 years ago, that allowed for the state and state agencies to have companies doing under $250,000 a year to compete on contracts up to $50,000. Firms doing under $1 million could compete up to contracts competitively against each other for contracts up to $250,000. That law was not ever used by any state department. So all we've been getting, and that's why Black Lives Matter, is because what we're supposed to have, and when you leave the table, you think you have something, but at the end of the year, when you see the actual participation, it's not there. And it's really every agency, Blacks are doing worse than anyone else. And it's been consistent for years and decades. And hopefully now with the disparities being illuminated worldwide, because Blacks also got to start and consider doing business outside the country. But I tell you right now, with the way this coronavirus is going, I think it's going to be a little while. I know I heard James earlier. I don't think it's going to be that quick, because folks are going, the numbers are going up everywhere. And a lot of people that's been out in the public in big mass gatherings, it's going to be something else. And at the Republican convention, I guess they don't have enough hotel rooms in Jacksonville, so they're going to put the Republicans on cruise ships. That's going to be interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, your thoughts, on the fact that of reparations. I think that's been one of the biggest things since, the death of Judge Floyd started, because you're going to be looking back at the incidents that happened back in New York. I can't think of the gentleman's name. Was it Sean Bell in 2006? Correct me if I'm wrong, when he was killed by the officers. You look at the gentleman from Africa that was killed, I believe, in 1999 by the officers. You're looking at situations where law enforcement, has done certain things to people of color, and nothing has actually been done because they've had a lot of protection in terms for the guild, because it's not necessarily a union. Most people consider it to be a guild. And I think right now, some of the talk has really been reparations, for the last several decades, and nothing is coming to the full table. Do you think now, because of this unrest and also a combination with the virus, that they're seeking this as a chance where, people of color, or actually just Black people in general within this country, can seek these reparations that they've sought for decades?
What I want to respond by saying is that to me, it's more and it's easier if they have a federal designation in every federal agency for the people who's been here 400 years, African descendants of the United States enslaved. If they have that in each department of each federal agency, they have people that look like us running that program for us. Now, if we take 10% of the military budget, Adam Smith's money, who's the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, that budget is $780 billion. If you take 10% of that, $78 billion. I think $78 billion here could do a lot for African descendants of the United States enslaved. So we need to do that so we can participate immediately while we discuss reparations. Because we know what the federal agencies do, and we know if we have people dedicated to looking out for our interests in each one of those agencies, and then they come back down to Tacoma and Federal Way and have the same thing set up there. But I think we need to do that's already there. So reparations could be a long conversation, but if we can have that federal designation and have those departments set up right away, I don't think it's going to happen under 45, under Trump. I don't think it's going to happen there. But I think with the way it's going right now, I think there's a possibility that could happen in January or February. Several members of the Congressional Black Caucus are already on board with it. And there are a lot of other high-profile entertainers and athletes also support it. As a matter of fact, I had a conference call with a couple of athletes in Common, Lonnie Rashid, just a couple of days ago. Matter of fact, last weekend. And it's this new awakening because the players in the NFL and the NBA, they're finally saying they've had the power the whole time. And now with their social consciousness and with their attention they're paying to economic justice now, I see us, if we can get rid of the virus, I see us going a long way. So thank you.
Okay. And what are the thoughts, Deputy Mayor Blocker, the rest of the individuals on the panel? Some of the topics, I know this revolves around reparations, but you're looking also at complete unrest, the complete change of the police system. There's a lot of talk about really deforming it, and just trying to say that the police should kind of fund themselves. So what are the discussions that maybe you guys have had to thinking if that's something that could be viable, or do you think that maybe the officers themselves should try to find other options, in ways that they police the systems and police the communities that they tend to serve?
So yeah, just this past Tuesday, the mayor and I had a very interesting discussion about police reform, but we have redefined it as police transformation, and looking at what are our officers called to do. A lot of the things that they're called to do, in my opinion, we don't necessarily need armed police officers to do. For example, if someone is struggling with domestic violence in the home, an officer shows up after that woman, or in cases the male is harmed, right? I don't see how an armed officer is useful in that moment, when perhaps a social worker or someone else could show up to address that. We go back into the 1990s, when there was an influx of officers hired to address the gangs in our community. We've probably seen that influx of officers hired during the crack epidemic period in the late 80s, mid 90s. There was an influx of officers hired. What we're now seeing into today's age is more officers are being brought on to address homelessness. If you ask any officer or the average officer at Tacoma Police Department, they'll tell you they're dealing with a lot of vagrancy issues, and it's my opinion that if that's the case, then why do we need armed officers addressing homelessness problems? So that's one thing. Another thing is, while we have this discussion about police reform, it's really important that we recognize that our officers are dealing with a lot of things that perhaps they shouldn't be doing. We're asking officers to be therapists. We're asking officers to be social workers. We want them to engage our communities and work with young people. We want them to be coaches in the neighborhoods. We're asking officers to do a lot, and we have cases where officers are working 2 shifts or double shifts and overtime. So if that's the case, then perhaps we need to really reevaluate what community policing actually is, and start to restructure or transform the ways in which that we police our communities. Right now, we look at our officers. I was telling our mayor, we have too many Dirty Harrys when we need more Sherlock Holmeses, right? We need to have officers who are going to investigate crimes, because the fact of the matter is they show up after the harm is done. And we say officers are here to serve and protect, but you could question if that's actually what's happening, particularly in the city of Tacoma, where Black people feel 3 times less safe than our white counterparts. So there's something to be said about that when we look at how our policies and procedures that have been created that allow officers to dehumanize people, in terms of the way we police. I made a tweet maybe about a few weeks ago that talked about how we're using 19th century police tactics in the 21st century. So we know that the ways in which our officers police our communities is based upon catching slaves, right? And that's a fact. And if that's the case, then why are we using these same police tactics and have these policy and procedures that allow officers to treat people in an inhumane way when we know there are better ways to engage people, particularly when we're dealing with people who have mental health issues? Do we need an officer engaging people who who are going through a mental health crisis, and the officer doesn't have the skill sets to de-escalate that situation? So there's a lot of things that's going on with policing. But my last point would be, we're not just dealing with, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, we have to hold all institutions accountable, and there's not one institution in the United States of America that doesn't play a role in creating disparities for Black people. So while we hold police officers accountable, we need to look at our schools, our school districts. We say things like the school to prison pipeline, school to prison pipeline, but we constantly point the fingers at the police officers. So we're not looking at how these young people are getting into these situations. So we have to draw that connection. And with that, we can't leave out our medical institutions when Black women are dying at higher rates when they give birth, when Black babies are dying at higher rates and can't make it to the age of 1 and 2 years old. So there's all sorts of institutions that cause the disparities in the Black community. And while we're dealing with, COVID and looking at the impacts of anti-Blackness, I think it's in our best interest to look at every institution that has contributed to the loss of Black lives. And that's not just at the hands of police. That's our education systems, that's our medical institutions, that's our public sector, that's our private sector, it's our nonprofits, you name it. There's not an institution, in my opinion, in the United States of America that is not a racist institution. And unless you're intentionally trying to be an anti-racist institution and you're being neutral, then you're a racist institution, and you have to do the necessary work to make that shift, that paradigm shift. So I'll stop there. Thank
I
you
want to
for
hop in real quick here
comment.
because thank you so much, Deputy Mayor Blocker, because you just laid like the whole stage. So I want to also be respectful of everyone's time. Deputy Mayor Blocker has basically said the why, the reasons for everything of why we're here today. So at this point, the conversation should just be about solutions, because we have the solutions in our community. So what can we do to support that message? And what I mean by that is, what are the actual steps that involve like this defund the police movement, right? How do we reallocate these funds? Like when we're thinking about it, we're like, how do we make sure there's additional funding for social workers in our schools? How do we reallocate that? How do we make sure that the community understands exactly what that means, right? Because some people don't understand it. It sounds very radical, but the reality is it's something that we've been doing in our school systems for years, and they've been very comfortable with that. So we should keep that same energy and save lives. So how do we get to that point?
I'll just be real quick. Brother Rye just mentioned the $780 billion that goes to protecting the United States of America with our military. I mean, I would argue that a small portion of those funds could be redirected into actually building up our community as opposed to protecting our community, right? We're looking at communities where there's millions of houses, a shortage of housing. We have a housing disparity. We have homelessness disparity. We have education disparities. And how can we focus so much on quote unquote protecting American citizens, and we're not investing in American citizens? So, just a small portion of that military budget could go to building our infrastructure, could go towards, educating our young people, could go towards, creating communities that don't have food deserts in it. Like we're a poverty stricken, nation, and we're one of the richest nations in the world, but we claim that, we need military funds and missiles and rocket ships to protect our nation. But in reality, we don't even provide enough services for adequate health care to protect our most vulnerable people. So, I would start there. Look at our military funds, and then you look at our city government. 35% of our funds go to policing. That's 1/3 of our funds. So
35, you guys are generous. Ours is 53.
right. And I think the county's
But to
higher,
cap it
right?
I want to ask you a question because that's an interesting point you brought up. So referring to the military budget, when I think about that, what I think about the fact is all the aid programs we have. So we literally have the blueprint, and to me, as an outsider, I'm not a legislator, but it just appears like we already know what to do, and we do it when we go into other countries. We are very free with the social services we provide. The military is not allowed to engage unless someone tries to shoot them. They can't shoot them. So why do they do that to us? I feel like I would argue that the point is not that we need to find a solution. We just need to copy the blueprint that the military currently practices on foreign land with our own.
But check it out though.
residents.
Check it out though. They don't necessarily practice that, right? So again, the stuff that happens over there, we don't know what goes on over there. You know what I'm saying? Like if you talk to a soldier, there's a lot of things that go on over there that they come back and it didn't happen. You see what I'm saying? So we won't.
But so about those good things though, about the policies that say like that prevent the military from what I see.
Let me
How
finish.
do we enact those here?
Let me finish though. One thing is to be honest with you, that's one of the problems. Like they are hiring military police. So people that are coming from the military, you see what I'm saying? So you come from policing brown people over here, shooting brown people over here, and then you come back on the streets. Like I said, like I wanted to address a couple things that Deputy Mayor Blocker said, but one of the things is the situation where the kid in Federal Way got choked out by the AMPM on 320th, and they sued him, right? The police officer said that he was responding to a mission. You see what I'm saying? Like his mind is still overseas in the army. You see what I'm saying? Like you responded to a car accident like a mission. You see what I'm saying? So that's an issue. There's a couple other things that I wanted to say because I saw in the news that they were going at Mayor Woodard, you know what I'm saying, as far as wanting to hold the police accountable for one of the killings and then, the threats. So one of the things that I would say, because we went to the city council meetings, we were talking about, at the time, we didn't say defund the police, we were just saying reallocating but we couldn't get any support, right? And so it's the same thing with what you're saying about the army. What happens during election? What did George Bush run on? What did when you look at 13th, what did they run on? They run on a fear. We gotta go to war. So that's where that money comes from. They defund it, they'll take money away, and then somebody else will become president, and then they'll put money into it and say, oh, we're going to war with this person, we're going to war with that person, and we need to army up. And so it's getting the votes and supporting our legislators that are trying to do these things. Like when we went to the city council and we said that our budget is 53% for the police, 53% of the budget. And we had one, maybe two city council members that was on board with that. And then the rest of them were against it. But here's the thing though, right? We had an onslaught of citizens that were against it. You see what I'm saying? We had an onslaught of citizens that was like, no, we need more police. And I wanted to say, address what Deputy Mayor Blocker said about the police doing everything, because we brought that up. The police said that. They're doing everything from saving cats out of trees to everything. and so it wasn't right. And so I felt for what they were saying. I was like, man, some of these things, like you said, if you're a boxer and you tell a boxer to bake a cake, you know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't make sense. Like you got them doing stuff that's out of their expertise, man. And so I agree. The issue was when we talked about the overtime, they didn't want to give up the overtime. You see what I'm saying? We were like, you guys got $1 million overtime. City Councilman Jesse Johnson said we want to cap it at 500,000 and come back to the city council if you need more. And we couldn't get any leverage. So I'm saying, like,
Brother, I feel you. I feel you. But Mayor Woodard and Senator Peterson are not going to stay on past 10 o'clock. Our opportunity to tell them what our solutions are. Mayor Woodard has already said she's out, like, you know, I'm just being real. They know the background. The reality is we keep trying to educate people. They have access to resources. Their legislative aide, Senator Peterson, can go get him some research. They want to hear from us about solutions right now.
But that's
what is
solution.
the point?
I have a solution.
I need money for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what we need to be using this time for.
If you don't have support with it,
I have a solution.
Support for it, you're not gonna get it. That's what I'm trying to say. With the people that get elected.
Well, yeah, but this, we can gather the support. We can do that. But this is our access to Senator Peterson. We don't get him in our community meetings.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
Could I offer a solution? Hello.
Quickly.
Oh yes. Sorry.
Hello.
No, yes, please.
Oh yeah. I don't know if you know it or not, but I-1776 is a replacement for I-1000, but it also includes a guarantee that when a COVID-19 vaccine is discovered or produced, that every citizen in Washington State would have equal access to that. That petitions are online. They can be signed and submitted. They have to be turned into the Secretary of State by July 2nd. So that was just, you talk about solutions, that's one way to cut us in. And the other way to cut us in is to have our elected officials say, we know what the disparities are. You agree there's been anti-Black racism for centuries. You know they built this joint for free, and therefore we need to have goals, mandatory goals for participation for Black folks. If we could do it for white women, we can certainly do it for Black folks. So I'm just saying, it's up to people to take that step though, who are in position to take that step. Thank you.
I
agree. I think another solution would be that they have the social equity licenses coming up, and they should be designated to go to the Black community. And we can figure out how to utilize that revenue to make sure that we can take care of our communities. But those licenses should not be open to anyone else, because we've been the most criminalized over that. We've watched other people profit and retire and make generational wealth for their families, yet again, on the backs of our communities. And I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas, I interrupted you.
Well, I was just going to say that when I use the word defund the police, I lose 90% of the conservative people I'm talking to. When I use the words divest and reinvest, then they want to hear what I have to say. Now, when you stop and look at it, and this should be something you can do, Mayor Woodard, is if you're looking at your police officers spending 7% of their time going to do something with homeless people, if you take 7% of that budget or even half of that and move that into housing for people, if they're spending 20% of their time on people who are just having a mental crisis, if you pull 10% of your budget and put that into mental professionals, just not defunding the police, but moving the funding into professionals who work and deal with the issues that your officers really shouldn't be dealing with. That way you're still working with the same pot of money, but you're allocating it to people who can do a better job with the situation than just walking up as an armed police officer.
That's a fact.
Mayor Woodards.
Yes.
Oh, you have any input on this, man?
Look, I was listening. I got into the conversation and I'm like, it's been a long day. I was just sitting back like being educated by all the brothers on this call. A lot of stuff to say, and I know that Deputy Mayor Blocker and Fred just reiterated it again. I mean, I think Fred is right when you say defund the police. I tell this story. Just 2 weeks ago, a young Black man in our community, his nephew was murdered. You think he wants the police defunded? No, he wants a detective to go find out who killed his nephew. And so I think what Fred said is right. I'm on this whole kick. I'm not interested in reforming anything anymore. It's too broken. I'm not trying to fix, oh, that's my baby. Hi, baby. That's my godson right there.
Mm.
But I'm not interested in reforming everything. It's too broken. We need to transform everything. And so when we look at what police do, I think that is a form of transformation. We take away the things. They're like school teachers. We have tons of examples, but they're like school teachers, right? School teachers they're counselors, and they have very little time to teach because they're so busy doing all the other things.
But how do we change that
That's
though?
part of our public servants. And so I think we've got to look at that. I think we've got to think about what police do, and in conjunction with what, excuse me, somebody's texting me at the same time I'm talking. But we have to think about what police do in conjunction with what other people do in the community.
Mhm.
And then as we think about transformation, I think the other thing that we've got to talk about, especially talking about police reform, is we've got to get into the contracts of police. We've got to look at what we agree to what we agree to now and what we've been agreeing to forever. We put them at a disadvantage sometimes by the training we give them, by the institution they come up in, right? By the culture that they're influenced by. And then we want them to go out on the street. And as I think I can't remember who just said it, but the fact that the gentleman said, the cop said he was on a mission. He wasn't there to help anybody. He was on, that was Lamont who said that. He was on a mission. So, so I think we do have to look at what they do. And we have to look at the culture that they're raised in, the training that they get, and exchange that for something better. So I think there are a lot of things we can do. We in Tacoma on Tuesday, we just talked about body cams. For every police department that doesn't have a body cam, that certainly is another way to get justice for our community. It costs more money up front, but it's certainly going to make police officers think about their actions. So there are some things that we can do in Tacoma, but I'm interested in what potential solutions other solutions you all have.
So,
I
Mayor,
want
I
to
have
make sure we check in with Senator Peterson. So based on what you've heard, what is it that the Senate can do to help us on a city and county level so that we can advocate for our communities?
So I guess I'd start by saying that I agree with several of the comments that I heard before, that we have to realize that if we're focusing only on the police, which is the part that I have the most influence over, we're really just putting a Band-Aid on the very end of the system, right? We have systemic racism embedded in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our housing system, and we need to put substantial effort into transforming those systems so that people never wind up encountering the police.
Right, because honestly,
So
Senator Peterson, I think I have a good example for you. If you look at in the 70s, children were being murdered, right? So they said CPS needs all this authority to take children. But where was the soft touch? I think all of our systems need a soft touch. They need the ability to be able to just interact with our community members and find their needs without there being like a fear of penalty. I think that our communities, as far as like culturally relevant services, there's a need to just completely wrap them around. But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fair, and I'm mostly here to listen to and learn about what you all are seeing. We have a lot of groups that have done really good work on ideas for what police should be required to do or what they should be prohibited from doing in policing. So the mayor mentioned body cameras. That's a whole complicated set of issues, and they're expensive to get started, but they're really important for accountability and for sort of self-policing for for the officers who are wearing them to make sure that they're thinking about the fact that what they're doing might wind up on the front page of the News Tribune or the Mirror or the Seattle Times. Having some more standards about requiring officers to exhaust other alternatives before they resort to lethal force, imposing standards about a duty to intervene. I think one of the most distressing things about the situation with the killing of George Floyd was seeing those other young officers just standing by and doing nothing while they saw a man being murdered. So creating both the duty and then the education that brings people to the point where they know that they are empowered to intervene if they see something that's going wrong. We have a bunch of practices that I think ought not to be any longer, and those include the use of chokeholds or strangleholds. We've had a big problem in Seattle with people covering up their badge numbers, ostensibly out of respect for fallen officers, but in fact, the result is a lack of accountability and transparency. And frankly, right in my neighborhood, a huge amount of tear gas employed against peaceful protesters. So we need to be having a serious conversation about whether that's ever appropriate. And then we have the mayor was
Peterson, I have
mentioning.
a question about that really quick.
Yeah.
I have a question about that really quick. When you say if that's ever appropriate, like I struggle with why is that even a question? Because that's like been a huge statement of the Geneva Convention. Like, how is it that we're even struggling with that on a local level? Like, where's if certain things violate UN guidelines on a local level? Because the reality is, I personally, as a community leader, feel like I cannot affect, I can't rally my entire neighborhood and change who's president. But what I can do is work with people that are local in my state. So these things are about like the Geneva Convention, the UN, we're getting kicked out of these things. These are already things that are like very standard on an international level. There has got to be a way that on a state level, since we're supposed to have autonomy from the federal government, that we can make sure that these more culturally relevant policies are respected. Like tear gassing people is literally a war crime. This should not be a conversation or even a what do we look into? Like this should just be like, who are we actually charging?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm interested to hear if there's anybody who can articulate any reason why we shouldn't just flat out ban the use of tear gas against peaceful protesters, or maybe altogether by police. I think one of the images that I have been.
But like even with that, Senator Peterson, like that's just like one step. That's a response to like something very small, right? And I want this to be a dialogue, so I don't want you to feel like I'm interrupting you to be rude, but I want to catch you right where you're at so we can stay in the moment. So like, even with that, in that moment when you're changing that tear gas law, what about Breonna Taylor? So like, no knock warrants. What about Philando Castile, legal gun owner, mentioning he has a gun in the car? We don't need just one policy. If we're gonna do this, let's just keep it all real and keep it funky and change everything that hurts us. If we're going to do this, this has to be a thing that changes. So we need to change the way we even adjust policies. If they're not working, what is the system that triggers a change? We can't just continue like this, because the reality is we're never going to have another moment like this in any of our lifetime. So we have to be real about what is the real goal. Because if we're only looking for one thing, we are still going to be in the same place with racism in a year or two. It has got to be a full out change. So we can't just focus on one thing like that. We've got to figure about every single policy and every single agency across the state. What is the change that's going to be implemented now that we can clearly see, so people can start to feel safe, so that they can feel comfortable, so that they can generate wealth, so that we truly have equality. It can't just be like a singular focus. Everything, we got to throw all our guns at this. I need like everybody in the Senate on a different task. I need everybody in the house on a different task. I need every community-based leader on a different task, spreading the messages that are unified to create this change.
Initiative 1776 and a federal designation by the federal government in every federal agency, and have folks run that department and have a budget for us. And that's
Can you explain that a little bit for me, Mr.
Housing,
Rice, so that we
healthcare.
understand what we need to be fighting for?
Pardon?
I'm
Can you
gonna have to
explain that
jump
just
off
for
the
my
call. I'm gonna have to
audience
jump
and
off
for
the
Senator
call,
Peterson and the
everybody.
guests?
All right, Mr.
Okay.
All right, we're good night.
Thank you so much.
They won't go to bed unless I put them to bed.
I feel it. I feel
You're
it.
a good
I had
daddy.
to get
Right
a
on.
sitter tonight, so I feel you.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you, everyone.
Thank you. So, Mr. Wright, could you explain what I-1776 is for everyone? Because I think that our audience may not know exactly what you're referring to, even though, you know, we've been well involved way back when it was I-1000 and I-200.
Right,
But
and
for
what
our
it is
audience-
it's I-1000, but it adds a caveat, and that is that when the coronavirus vaccine is developed, that it guarantees every citizen in Washington State will have equal access to that vaccine, regardless of income, because we know right now people making decisions whether they're going to have their prescription filled or buy groceries or go see the doctor or pay their rent. And coronavirus has really illuminated the disparities that we have as African Americans in healthcare. So that's one.
Can I ask about that though? Because like when we talk about this, and you mentioned numerous times like underlying issues, how come we don't address the underlying issues? Like that's what I want to see. How come we don't address the diabetes? How come we don't address the hypertension? Like, I mean, the vaccination is cool, but the thing of it is a lot of our when it comes to us, we die more from everything. Prostate
Because
cancer,
of economic inequality.
absolutely.
And that's the key right there. With economic equality, a lot of underlying conditions we would not have. The net wealth of a Black family is 1/10 of a white family. And then you look at the fact, most of the underlying conditions have directly related to your economic standing.
So again, so that's what I would like to see effort put into, as far as raising that bar and raising the consciousness of eating healthy and exercising. And like you said, I went to New York, and that was like my first time there, and I was just surprised at like how far you had to go to like a grocery store, because everything's like a bodega, everything's like the corner store. And you know, we were like, let's go to the grocery store. It was like, yeah, it's like 20-30 minutes away, and you got to go to. I was like, man, no wonder like you guys eat a lot of, you know, because it's not like readily available. So I think Deputy Mayor Blocker talked about food
that makes
deserts.
a real good
Like,
point.
that's a food desert for real. Like, I didn't even know that was. I'm from North Carolina, so you know we can go outside and pick up an apple off the ground from a tree. So you know, I just never had seen that before. But I would definitely like to see like the underlying, because we die at a higher rate for a lot of stuff. HIV.
Well, but the reality is,
it seems like we're at the top.
We know the
for
underlying
everything bad
causes.
and the bottom.
Those are preventative medicine and preventative food and nutrition. Like, we know what those things are statistically. We could get the data. That's easy. The solution though is like, why is public health not involved in making sure like they do like community navigator events? Why are they not at every farmer's market, making sure that everyone knows what their accessibility is to WIC, to buying more food, right? Or whatever the solution is. But why is public health not more involved? Just last week, Dow Constantine declared like basically racism as a public health emergency. So public health has funding through the county and all of our counties, and I'm sure there's state funding as well. What is public health going to do to address these issues, to make sure that Black women are not dying when they're having babies, to make sure that like, where's the priority with that? We can't just continue to say, yes, we're passing a resolution. We see a problem. We've all seen the problem. We all know about it. And a thing that I struggle with my community is we struggle so much to be heard. We want to be heard in these moments when we're at the table. And the reality is everybody at the table knows the statistics. We all know, but we're keeping it cute and re-explaining it. No, what we need? we need to create a system of reparations. And that's what's going to bring us back to an equality, some equity. There's going to have to be some needs, some things done to undo harm, so that our people, Black people, can even engage with these systems appropriately. Like, if you go through, it took some years for me to understand how to interact with these meetings and Robert's rules. Our families don't even understand how to make the request of the school board or of the city, and they don't know if they're being told the truth or a lie, because they don't understand the system. That's really the issue. Because
So,
if
Mr. Rye, so Mr. Rye, do you think, I know it's already, you guys already got it going and everything, but is it possible to add something or to address funding for health in the Black community to address underlying issues, or is that something that
no, Lamont, this is not about Mr. Rye. This is about Senator
I was just saying
Peterson.
the thing that he
These
was,
are our needs. What can the Senate do to direct that money? Mr. Rye has the
Yeah.
same access as we do. We need to know what our legislators and the Senate can
no,
do,
that's
because
a
they
fact.
have
I
no
just was
Black
saying because he was
leadership in the Senate.
explaining. I was
Now,
just saying because he was explaining.
y'all mind if I interject real quick? I just got a text, and I'm hoping that maybe Mr. Thomas can even elaborate on this. The same laws that you were referring to earlier, Lynn, were passed actually right now and working in Colorado, and it's SB 2217, which deals with
Okay.
enhanced law enforcement integrity. And so it's kind of making sure
27.
there's
I'm sorry, can you repeat that number?
SB 2217 for Colorado.
Okay.
Well,
No,
yes,
I was talking about Mr. Rye because he was answering the question. So he was talking about the bill that was replacing I-1000, and I was
It's a
just commenting.
petition.
Yeah,
It's
well, I'm sorry, the
initiative.
petition.
1776.
Right,
Yeah,
and
and
we're
I was
gonna
just-
have them on the show next
Oh.
week, but we don't have Senator Peterson. That's why I'm trying to direct us back to this, because Mr. Rye, I love you, and we have a little bit more access to you. You know, we come to Tacoma Collective, so I want you to share your thoughts, also directed back to Senator Peterson, but I don't want us to be collectively strategizing right now in this moment, because the moment right now is what can we get in tandem working with Senator Peterson. We can continue
Well,
these
we can
conversations in our regular
get
circle.
if Senator Peterson and other state officials, state elected officials would support a federal designation for African descendants of United States enslaved to be implemented in every federal agency in Washington, D.C. And that will trickle down to the state level. But if Senator Peterson and other state legislators would do that, because the federal government have the money, okay? So, and if it's the law, then that means we're going to be included. But we can talk about reparations after that happens. But by doing that right away, because we have a lot of Blacks. Yeah, I go to DC frequently, or did up until a few months ago. There are a lot of Black folks that work in all these agencies already, could easily transition over to that new department. And that's the way we raise ourselves up immediately.
Senator Peterson, I would like to say that 940 Washington State put out the first, we were leaders in this country on police reform. Now we have this bill in Colorado that is basically accomplishing what we set out to do, knowing it was going to take more than one step. We as a state are falling behind instead of being leaders. And that's where you and your colleagues need to push us back to the forefront. You need to push what our state is doing ahead of these other states, not only in police accountability, but as we say, in the way that Black people are being treated in our state. We don't need to wait for the national government to do something. We don't need to wait for another state to do something. We need you to jump forward, and you and your colleagues to put us out in front and let everybody follow us. Now, as far as the body cameras, I don't know what you're doing in Seattle, but I know that the Puyallup tribe offered to buy Tacoma all the body cameras they could have. And for some reason, that just has not happened. The money, it's not a money issue for them because the money is appropriated from the Puyallup tribe. And one more thought, before you go throwing tear gas out, if the police had to use tear gas on my son as my wife instructed them to do, our son would be alive today. Instead, they chose a bullet. They had a 37 there, they had tear gas, they had tasers. Their only confidence when dealing with the black man was a bullet. So let's not just jump all on the bandwagon because everybody's saying, oh, don't tear gas everybody. Don't tear gas a crowd, but one person in a house with 29 officers, I think tear gas would work better than a bullet.
I don't know.
I'm sorry for ranting away. That's
No, it's good. We are looking really so first of all, I guess for those who don't follow the way that our state government works, we adjourned on March 12th and we're not back. We have no ability to put ourselves back in session until January of 2021. The governor may call us back into special session. And so we are trying to get ready for that possibility and trying to get ready to do meaningful work in the area of police accountability if we're back in August or November for a special session. We're looking very carefully at the Colorado Bill 2217. And there are a lot of pieces of that bill that I think are going to find their way into Washington law, whether that's in special session or in the next regular session. We're also looking more broadly than what they were able to do in Colorado at the reforms, for example, that are proposed by Aid Can't Wait and the NAACP. So, you know, I think we probably have a list of somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or 35 things that we're working through and trying to figure out what we can get done. And we will try to do as much as we can to make for meaningful transformation of the system. And I take your point about the tear gas, and Lynn, that you know, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm hoping to hear from people about why they might need to keep that alternative. But I think what's been profoundly troubling to me is to watch the difference in reaction for law enforcement to the protests over police and the protests about the government's reaction to the pandemic. So, you know, you've got huge crowds of armed and almost all white protesters that swarm the Capitol or elsewhere, and they're certainly not met with tear gas or people in riot gear. Frankly, I don't know if you saw that there was some footage of the sheriff down in Lewis County that became public here yesterday, the day before, I guess it was just yesterday, essentially cheering on a crowd of people who were saying that they weren't going to wear masks after the governor's order. And, you know, it's completely alarming that you would have somebody who's sworn an oath to uphold the law taking that position and that was an all white crowd down there by that billboard that we all drive by if we go to Portland. You know, and the difference between that reaction and the reaction that the police have had in my neighborhood here on Capitol Hill to people who were gathered to express their outrage at the way that Black people had been treated by police here and elsewhere. It's deeply disturbing. So we have a significant obligation to make sure that we have real change there. And absolutely, we're looking at the Colorado bill and want to be out in front and showing the country what's possible.
I appreciate that. But the only thing I would say, as I was reading the Colorado bill, is I noticed that it puts the burden on the state as far as payment. And I think as a community, we need to move away from that model. If there is, like, for instance, if you work for a school district and they find you aren't—
You're talking about the qualified immunity section?
Right. So like, for instance, if you work for a school district and you are found out to be embezzling, like you are violating the rules and you are wrong, you're fired, then they don't cover your bill. That's your personal liability. And I mean, I can't speak for every single person, but I know that in talks I've had with my community, it is really a struggle. The fact that we end up as taxpayers paying for their bad behavior. I think it sends the wrong message. I think it almost perpetuates it because, like, yeah, you complained and then you paid to fix it. But what I also want to do is, and this is completely my fault, but I want to give Davita Briscoe some space, and she is with Not This Time. And so her organization actually goes into Monroe Prison, and they have a pilot project that I think would be helpful and useful to this conversation for her to discuss what they're currently doing and how it could be expanded upon during this critical time when everyone's paying attention to actually funding these type of processes. Davita.
Oh, hey, I'm here. Hi. Yeah, that's my job work. The other work that I do on the side is with Not This Time. I'm the assistant director. Andre Taylor is my brother. Shay Taylor was my brother who was killed in 2016 by 2 SPD officers. Some work that we've already kind of started is pushing Initiative 940. Independent, making a mandatory de-escalation training and mental health training, first aid, independent investigations. I'm sure you're already aware. We're in the stage right now. We've also pushed for some significant reforms in the King County inquest hearings, which are now being held up by lawsuits that are filed by several. Federal Way is one of them. Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to where we are now in the phase of implementing 940, although it was, it was passed, but there are some things that we needed to address, some gaps that 940 didn't address, like police dogs and high-speed chases and independent prosecutors. So now we've formed a working group to address some of these other gaps of what 940 did not address. Revisiting our state, our deadly force policy, looking at other deadly force policies and trying to strengthen that a little bit. San Francisco has a really good model that's been adopted by some other places. So yeah, I don't know, I can speak to a whole bunch of things, but yeah, we've been doing this work for about 4 years now. Fred Thomas was part of our team too. So yeah, but we got hit by COVID-19. So we were just at the tail end of completing some of that work, but we're just now gearing back up with our working group.
Appreciate it, definitely, for the information that you just provided. And one of the other things too that I think was touched on slightly, by Mr. Thomas, and I think even Mr. Rye, was the fact that the buddy camps, that officers are supposed to have. Actually, excuse me, Senator Peterson even touched on it. But the one thing we got to consider is that the buddy cams, the officers have access to turn it on and turn it off. I mean, are there going to be specific laws in place where you have to leave it on at all the times? Because if they're able to change that, some of the incidents that have occurred, you can actually see the whole truth, rather than people making certain decisions beforehand, and seeing a certain video 2-3 months down the road that put all the pieces together. If there are ways that those can be implemented, it can kind of change things in the narratives that actually happen when this incident occur on a regular basis. So what are your thought processes on the buddy cam situation? Because some people think that that's still not quite, as well placed as it is, ever since it came into being the last, I believe came out about 6 years ago, and it's still, a work in progress.
Is that for me?
Anybody can answer that.
I'll just say that the issue about when body cameras need to be turned on is super complicated and is tied to the issue of public records in our state. So when those are created by public employees, such as police, the strong default is that those are matters of public record and therefore available to anyone. So police go into all sorts of situations. I mean, it's easy to say on the one hand, yes, they should just always be on. Police go into all sorts of sensitive situations. They walk into medical facilities where their cameras might pick up people's protected health information on medical charts, for example. They walk into a situation where there are minors involved, maybe in when there's been a domestic violence call. So it is, I sat through a summer of task force meetings trying to figure out how to get greater adoption of body cameras. And we wound up with this idea that they should generally be on, that local departments that deploy them should generally require them to be on without officer discretion to turn them on and off, but with a set of exceptions of times when they needed to be able to turn them off. So it's just one of those things where it always turns out to be more complicated in practice than it seems like it should be.
Okay. And I think that the other issue that I know, especially with the death of Judge Floyd, it has brought a lot of attention is the fact that if an officer were to do something, you don't usually have the information on public records for people to view. Let's say you or me or anybody here were to go on a high-speed chase or do something reckless, our information is on public record. But for someone who's considered, servant of the state, that's not the case. You can look at situations where they could be, they could have internal affairs, brought up to the board. They could have several incidents that could occur. You would not know about it until they actually become terminated. So are there certain, configurations that are going into place to kind of quell, the distrust that civilians or individuals might have in dealing with law enforcement? Because they feel that if they don't know you, how can they really trust you? And they don't know about this until afterwards. So they can say, well, this person committed so much. Why was he or she still on the force? And why is it that this individual has been hired multiple times over and over based on previous occurrences?
Yeah, that needs to change. And one of the things that we're working on right now is significant change to the decertification process, so that, right now, for example, if a police officer who has used excessive force can kind of see the writing on the wall that he or she is about to get fired, they can resign in lieu of termination, and they don't get, the investigation doesn't continue. They don't get decertified. They can walk, go down the street to another agency and get hired on there, and there's no loss of their badge. We need to change that system so that when somebody has violated the public trust, they're never going to work in law enforcement again. We should not be giving people a badge and a gun who have already abused that authority.
Senator Peterson, I have a question. I noticed that a lot of people have said like we should have a special session, and there's like all these conversations about it. But I also see in other states, and I'll be honest, I'm only well versed in the state of Washington. So I'm basically saying this from a status of reading articles in other states. I see that their legislature is like in session passing laws now. So what is like, why is it that we can't just like do one like tomorrow, like say Monday, and we just decide we're gonna start making changes? Like, what is the disconnect there? And just really for background audience, for my audience to understand the process.
Sure. So, every state has its own constitution and its own traditions about how the legislature comes into session. There are some legislatures that are full-time legislatures, and so they're going on all the time, and bills can come up and get introduced. So, and that's typical in large states such as California. In states at the other end of the spectrum, and Washington was in this camp until 1979, the legislature meets only every other year. So it used to be the case that that we would meet only in the odd years, and then we could get called into special session in the other year if the governor wanted us to. Our Constitution says that we gather every year on the second Monday in January, and then have in the odd years a 105-day session, in the even years a 60-day session, and then gives the power to the governor to call us into special session for 30-day periods when the governor wants to. So Governor Inslee could call us into special session. He has not chosen to do so far. You know, I think for probably a variety of reasons, including the fact that it'd be very difficult during the pandemic for us to do our work. You know, the legislature's at its best when it has large gatherings of people that convene and testify and share their views, and then we go into our caucus rooms and debate things hotly, and then come out on the floor of the Senate and the House and debate things hotly. None of that is really possible in a world where you have to have social distancing and people aren't supposed to be in inside spaces together for long periods of time. So we're trying to figure out whether we can work remotely and get some work done if we were going to have a special session, but that's not. But we haven't worked that out. And in any case, and you're muted, by the way. There you go.
Oh yeah, I just saw it. So, but basically, even to have like a special session, you guys would need to meet in person to vote on that, like to do it from home.
Yeah, we would at least a quorum of the House and Senate would have to convene in Olympia to have a vote to change the Senate rules to allow us to vote remotely. And then even
that's really important for like my audience to know, because they feel like this is something you guys can just say like, oh, by email, we just decided. And that the reality is procedurally, there are things that really prevent things. It's not like, yeah, there are things that we'll be honest that we just feel like are just racist and they need to change. But right here, this is something that there is a real procedural step that kind of prevents our legislature, regardless of if they agree or not with the fact that there needs to be changes right now that prevent us from doing that.
Yeah, our Constitution is the highest law, right? It can't be changed by initiative even. It takes 2/3 majorities in the House and Senate, followed by a vote of the people to change the Constitution. And the Constitution is what creates the basic rules for how the legislature can act and gives the legislature the authority that we have. So it tells us when we convene session and how we can get there and how many people need to be there for it to be a valid session. That's why we can't be there right now.
So I feel like what you're telling our communities is that we cannot control whether or not there's a special session, but what we already know that there will guaranteed be one in January. So if you have requests or things that you want your senators or House representatives to do, this is the time for you to be emailing them and contacting them so that they can be prepared with all of your asks or demands, whatever you want to call it, when they start that guaranteed session in January.
Or if there is a special session, right? The reality for engaging with legislators is that we all spend most of the year living in the communities that we represent. And this is the best time to engage with legislators. People think that it's a great idea to get on a bus and come down to Olympia when we're in session. We have very limited bandwidth to be able to talk to people at that time. But now, during the summer and fall, when we're at home, that's exactly the time when you need to be calling and pestering your legislators to bring issues to their attention, to advocate for your positions, because those experiences of conversations one-on-one or with small groups of people, those are the ones that stick with us when we're down there in the long days early in the year, making the decisions about which laws we're going to work on.
Well, I think one thing, even some of the audience members were actually trying to inquire is that there still should be very creative ways of having special sessions rather than wait 6 to 7 months from now. When you got to consider that this year is different because it's an election year. So it seems like things are being put for somebody else's own benefits. And once those elections are over, then they can decide if they even care about the constituents or the people that they serve. And I think one of the big things that people are considering now, especially within the state,
Oh,
and what's been happening the last couple of weeks is police accountability. They're trying to seem like, those in charge and in power are trying to push these issues to the corner, utilizing COVID maybe as a cover so they don't have the special sessions. And then so by the time things get back
wait,
to
I have a question, James.
Go ahead.
Audience member asked that goes right along with yours. So I want to merge the audience member's question with yours. As we keep seeing like the governor and the counties and even our local mayors creating like COVID-19 or pandemic laws, right? Based on their powers due to the pandemic. There aren't any laws like that because it seems, and maybe you did answer this, but because the question was asked, I want to make sure it's clear. Is it that Governor Inslee could call this only as far as a special session, but there's no other way for anyone else to trigger that session?
Right now, what the Constitution says is the governor has authority, and the governor has authority to bring us into special session. He just issues a proclamation, says that the legislature is called, and he can bring us back for 30-day periods, and he can do that indefinitely. The Constitution creates the ability for the legislature to create a process to bring itself back into special session. In the 130 years that our state has existed, we have never exercised our authority to create that process. So we don't have a mechanism to do that ourselves. One of the things that I think we have learned from this crisis is that we should have some mechanism to do that. So I suspect that in the next session or two, that's a law that will pass, is a way for the legislature to bring itself back into session in an appropriate time.
Senator, I would like to ask, you talked about a bill that would track officers and not allow them to resign and get hired somewhere else. How would I find out about that bill, and how could I learn more about it if I don't know the bill number?
Yeah, so that's one that is really likely to be, if we do have a special session, that's one that's really likely to be considered during the special session. We're working hard on that language right now. So I think if you watch the agendas of my committee, the Senate Law and Justice Committee, and or the House Public Safety Committee, that's a bill that you will see on the agenda for discussion, and that's probably the best way until we actually have a bill number.
Okay, great.
Is there a way that I guess I have a question, because currently we enacted or we're working with the county, and there's certain things that we're doing that are in building our programming. So as nonprofits, I feel like we don't truly understand our power. From your perspective, Senator Peterson, how can nonprofits organize and mobilize citizens as far as civic engagement? Clearly nonpartisan, just civic engagement. How can we help you get what you need from the community so they know, so they can influence what they want to see within the state of Washington?
Well, I guess first I want to back you up just a little bit from your statement about nonpartisan. The reality in the legislative process is that 95% of what we can do or not do is set by the voters, by the people that they send down to Olympia to represent them, right? And we are now just a few months away from all 98 House members and half of the Senate being up for election. So the first thing that you just can't forget about the legislative process is it makes a profound difference who's there and who's not there, right? And now is the time when people are actively deciding who is going to be there and who is not going to be there. We had a little conversation earlier about this race down in the 28th district, which is Lakewood down to DuPont. And we have a fantastic woman, Tawana Nobles, who's a University Place school board member running against.
Shout out to Tawana.
Yep, running against.
She is definitely a supporter of our show. She's worked with us and is amazing.
Excellent. Well, she's running against a guy named Steve O'Ban, who's very conservative Republican. You can look him up. But you know what we're going to be able to do, the kinds of things that we can do in the Washington State Senate are going to depend on what the voters of the 28th district decide about whom they want to represent them in Olympia. And there are similar stories that are playing out across the state. So I don't mean to get too far down the road on this, but I just want to make the point first in terms of ways that people can engage, that absolutely, you know, we need to get rid of Donald Trump, but beyond that, there is a whole set of races on everyone's ballot that they need to pay good attention to. You know, in Federal Way, in the 30th district, you all have 2 seats because, you know, both of your 2 seats that are open because both of the representatives that were elected 2 years ago are not running again, right? Mike Pelciotti's off to
Mike
do his,
Pelciotti is going to be our state treasurer.
We hope, and Christine Reeves is busy running for Congress. So, you know, Representative Johnson is now running for election to a full term, and then you've got another open seat too. So those are exactly the people in whose campaigns folks can get engaged, and that makes a giant difference about who will be making the decisions when we reconvene the legislature. In terms of involvement by nonprofits, getting people to engage with their legislators, whether that's sending emails, letters, getting them to make calls, meet with people. Those are, you know, that kind of grassroots activism makes a huge difference about what legislators think is the most important thing that they can do to try to represent their district, right? So those are all things that nonprofits can do to create a sense of excitement and urgency around things that we can change in Olympia.
All right,
We got
Senator Peterson.
Another audience question, which was if their COVID-19 still is very rampant in January, will that prohibit session in January?
No. No, above everything that the governor can do or that we can do is the Constitution, which says that we must gather. Now, I think if the pandemic is going full force, we are going to have to figure out how to do things differently from how we have always done them. So that may mean sitting alone in our offices and voting from our offices rather than sitting all together on the floor. It may mean doing our caucus meetings like this by Zoom rather than gathering in tight quarters in our caucus room and having long debates. It may mean that we're not able to engage with constituents in the same way with people in person, but you know, then maybe we have more of these kinds of electronic meetings. It definitely means that we won't have crowded committee hearings.
Well, you're always welcome here, Senator Peterson.
Well,
every
thank
Thursday.
you. I appreciate it. It may mean that we can't have committee hearings. You know, for the last few years, I have done hearings on gun issues on MLK Day, so that you can have a lot of public participation, and have had 800-900 people who have come down to be present in the Senate Law and Justice Committee. That's probably not going to be possible until we have a vaccine. But on the other hand, we have over the last few years been testing out ways of having people appear by video from community colleges spread around the state so that they don't have to drive all the way from Spokane or the Tri-Cities or whatever to be in Olympia for 3 minutes of testimony. So I think there's a possibility that we can also work on that process to allow the legislature to be more accessible for people to appear.
All right, Senator Peterson, I got an audience question, and this goes back in terms of special session. They wanted to know in terms of you creating a process that kind of demands the start of a special session rather than wait, in terms of collectively pressuring the governor, and calling a special session, and what are the processes and going to making that happen or be a possibility?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what that would look like. I presume that it would be essentially a majority of legislators in each chamber that would say we need to get together, and that ought to be enough. If you had both the House and the Senate saying, "Hey, it's time for us to be in session," then that could be the triggering event to call a special session. But that's something that we would have to work out through a public hearing process, the same as any other law that we would pass.
Okay, I mean, I guess the reason is because I figured this has never been done before. I guess something that you mentioned earlier. So they wanted to have more clarity to see what the necessary steps would be of that being possible. All right. Well, anything else you feel you want to bring to the table, Mr. Thomas, in regards to some of the issues that Senator Peterson has discussed?
Well, I would just like to email you later and have some more conversation with you if that would be possible. But I find you had a lot of good answers and you gave some really good information, and I'd like to thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. I think you've been in my committee, haven't you?
Which one? I've been on
Senate
lately.
Probably in the Senate Law and Justice Committee.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome to email me anytime, and I appreciate the insights that you've brought to this discussion. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Lyle, I know we missed you, sir. But one thing that I do want to touch on, I know you brought the initiative that you wanted to be created. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, sir. One thing that people have been speaking of besides reparations is restitution. And of course, they're two different things. And restitution, of course, is always, paying for certain expenses, after a crime has been committed. Now, I'm sure you can go more into detail on that, but you got a reparation, which mainly is, it's a long-standing, correlation for years or even decades in our case. So what people are considering is that, especially with people of color right now in this country, it would be difficult to do reparations because they don't have a specific state or someone who can represent them. You can do it as a restitution, but I don't feel there's a collective group in time to make that a possibility. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that true, or is there some other ways that maybe this is being, considered or being corralled?
Now, is that for me, Eddie Ryan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, we have, we know who we are, and we can trace our ancestors back, a lot of people all the way to Jamestown. So I'm just saying, well, we know who we are in terms of the people that's been here for 400 years, the African descendants of the United States enslaved. We know who we are. And so that would not be a problem at all in terms of identification, because I have records from my great-grandmother, for example. So we know who we are. There'd be no question with identifying there. So that would not be a problem. But I'm certainly certain that as we went along with the whole reparations movement, it would also include other people who have been here in this country that served in the military and stuff like that from other African countries. So I'm just saying, but we know who we are. There's no question about that. And the thing is that to have this federal designation, and it also could apply. I mean, we could actually ask the city, county, and state right now to do that because of the fact they have the glaring disparities, they have the numbers, they know about the discrimination, but it's up to them to have the will to say, we're going to do this. It was done for white women without any quarrel whatsoever. And when that happened, a lot of black businesses, especially in construction, got ran out of business because of the fact that the majority of the prime contractors are white males. And if they're going to choose a black person or a white woman, it's going to be the white woman. If there's anybody else they can choose before they get to a black person, but that's been inherent. And it's American as statues that you see of Robert E. Lee, the highway name for Jefferson Davis. And that mentality is here in everyday life. The anti-black sentiment has been here forever. It's still here, and it has to be corrected. And that's one of the ways we could correct it, by making sure we have a designation for African descendant United States slaves in every federal agency. And also we got to talk to our local elected officials about the same thing. They all admit that it's here, and blacks have been totally discriminated against, but it's up to them now to step up the plate and offer some remedies to get it done. But if they have to go through majority white male-owned companies to get it done, it'll never happen. That's what been the failure of all these programs, is because they have left the implementation up to a private business who is profit motivated and who is, for the most part, it's obvious they were anti-black, because our numbers reflect that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for, the information and the history lesson that you have provided a lot of our audience members, Mr. Rai. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
It definitely was a pleasure to have you on, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Peterson.
Yes, this is like so amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely.
This is so amazing. I want to make sure before we get out, did everyone have a chance to make their comments? Everyone's
Our final comments.
good? Yes. Good? Okay, thank you so much, Senator Peterson. We're gonna probably definitely try to get you on more often, and with other leaders, and with the same leaders, so we can continue the conversation. But I want to make sure that, oh, yes, Davita's coming back on. I know she wanted to say some things, but I'm gonna give some announcements while she's connecting her audio, which is next Thursday. We always have Thursday Thoughts, so definitely tune in. And also every Friday at Lifestyles Barber Academy, you can get a USDA food box, you can get hygiene products, you can get connect with our program coordinator, Natalia, and schedule a resource meeting to connect you with whatever resources that you and your family may need for free. And like a multitude of things. If there's something you want to do, if you don't need resources, but you want to get involved, you can also schedule an appointment on our Facebook page. But I want to make sure I give some space. I know that there was a request and we kind of talked about it. And just to recap, the only way that we can start a special session is by Governor Inslee deciding to do such. So in that, I just keep saying it because I want y'all to hear me. Maybe you hopped off the live, maybe you just got back in. You keep saying, what can you do outside of vote in November? This is what you can do. Like, this is literally bare minimum. We have to change how we think of voting. It is not just in November. If that's what you're doing, I want you to really understand right now.
You got to vote in August first. August is the primary.
Thank
August,
you. Yes.
First Tuesday in
Forget
August.
August. Now we got a primary for the presidential. You got to start voting in March. Like, just continuous. If all you're doing is November, you have missed the entire train.
Because you have missed the primary elections in Washington State. This is first Tuesday in August is the primary elections in Washington State.
Ballots are going to drop in about 3 weeks.
It's true.
Yes. And so just to highlight, just to set the stage, for the second year in a row, we will also be holding an online ballot party. So when you have questions, please tap in, tell us what you want to know for the primary. What questions do you have? Send them to us early in case you're in other counties. We are happy to help people that do not live in the city of Federal Way. Our mission is to have a collective in every city within the state of Washington. Not even just Washington, everyone. I just feel like we are set up and a bridge with like cities and local government and nonprofits. They provide direct service, but we are focused on what is the policy that needs to change so the wheel continues to move. We all serve a purpose. No one is more important than the other. And we all need you as our audience. So I'm gonna let Senator Peterson finish. That's my little soapbox. Thank you guys for tuning in.
I'll just say thank you for having me on the show. It's great to meet all of you.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Wright, can you please share the information with our audience about how to get on your show, how to listen to your radio show?
Urban Forum Northwest broadcasts live on 1150 AM KKNW, streams on the internet at www.1150kknw.com. Programs for the last year are archived on urbanforumnw.com. Today's program will repeat Saturday morning, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. But like I said, the programs for the last year are archived at urbanforumnw.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Davida, I know we lost you with some technical difficulties for a second, so I'm going to give you a chance for final thoughts, as well as making sure your contact information is shared with our audience.
Sheena?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi. Just wanted to thank you, everyone, for being a part of this conversation. I can be reached at Devitta.Briscoe, DEVITTA .Briscoe, @gmail. Yeah, and you can also find me on social media, Devitta Briscoe. Yeah, that's about it.
Any final asks?
Oh, just only for me, I think the most important thing is looking at revisiting our deadly force policy and implementing some of the same changes that were in the Colorado bill that he mentioned earlier, or San Francisco. There's so many different things on those. Our deadly force policy needs to be strengthened and needs to be changed immediately.
ASAP. How about you, Mr. Thomas?
Oh, I just want to thank everybody for this format. I've learned a lot, and we're just happy to be part of pushing this wheel forward. And I wanted to also say to Davida, I'm still with you guys. I'm still hanging out there and listening and willing to do the work when you call for some work to be done. And thank you, Senator Peterson. You'll be hearing from us soon. And James, you're wonderful. Thank you.
Appreciate it, sir.
James, let me just interject one thing about several years ago, I worked with a lady by the name of Brenda Taylor, and a guy by the name of Shay Taylor was the president of the Black Prisoners Caucus, I think was at Clallam Bay. And we raised money.
Mr. Wright, just to clarify, that is Davida's brother.
Yeah, that's the brother, sister.
Okay, well, I just want to let you know
Yes, sir.
that was several years ago. We raised funds and they had an outstanding event. It might have been Juneteenth or Black History Month. And Shay Taylor was the president of the caucus. And after that year, the guards and the administration got so upset because it was such a first-class event, they canceled all of them after that. I just want to share that.
Man, that's unbelievable that it did that. Man. Well, thank you very much for sharing it, sir.
Thank you.
All right, sir.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much for joining us. Senator Peterson, I would love to continue these conversations. We do offline things. We coordinate with our city council meetings. So let's figure out how maybe we can get funding to coordinate with some of your committee meetings. And maybe we can make sure we get community members there. We can make sure that they're covered as far as their whatever. Let's have that conversation, see what we can do to support you getting the voices that you need at the table so that everyone gets what they want out of whether it's a special session, a regular session. I mean, I think that the answer is clear that everyone wants to see something different. And I think that would be a much cheaper process if there were more people at the table.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you guys all have a good night, and thank you so much for joining us. We are going to continue this conversation. We will see you next Thursday.
All right. You'll have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. You run a good show.
Oh, thank you.